Hi everyone, welcome to the Life of Education podcast. So today we're here with Chelsea Spackman and we're going to be talking about celiac disease. So Chelsea, do you want to let us know a little bit about your background and what led you to be obviously
interested in celiac disease?
Yeah.
Well, I first went to school right after high school for English and journalism and really disliked it. And I had a really severe eating disorder and spent a lot of time worrying about food, and my whole life was consumed with calories and foods and different ways of eating, different ways of weight loss and controlling my body. And at a very last straw, the last thing I could think of, that my family could think of, was to get me involved with a nutritionist. So if I could understand how food worked in my body, I could understand that I'm allowed to eat. That was kind of the first stepping stone. And I worked with a nutritionist, and she enlightened me. She was amazing. She saved my life completely. And because of her, I decided that I wanted to go to school for nutrition. So I went to the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, and then I did my degree in health sciences. And then I completed my master's in science of personalized nutrition at Middlesex University in the UK, and I graduated in 2017. I had my graduation ceremony. And then for my dissertation, for my master's, I focused in on celiac disease because I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 2014. So, but the reason I wasn't diagnosed is because I had atypical symptoms, and that's what my dissertation was on. And my dissertation has just been published in the Journal of Toxicology.
Amazing, congratulations.
Yeah, very exciting.
So just taking it back to before you learned anything about nutrition and diet, what did your world look like then? Like what were you eating? What were you struggling with?
I was eating every food in moderation. And I was eating the typical, I'd say, Western diet. So very carbohydrate heavy, lots of processed foods, easy foods, packaged foods, granola bars, things like that, but very small quantities. And then obviously sometimes not eating at all, or binge eating, or getting rid of food completely from my body. So very unhealthy diet, but typical what your doctor would tell you would be a healthy diet. So a lot of packaged foods, a lot of low-fat foods, for sure.
So then you had all these problems. The health problems that you had, were they physical? Did they manifest themselves physically? Like were you weak, ill, those kind of things?
So I had a lot of inflammation, and I was getting a lot of other symptoms along with it. So they kept telling me that I might have hypothyroidism, which I don't have. I don't have anything wrong with my thyroid, but the symptoms from celiac disease were coming in atypically. So I had a lot of inflammation. I was very bloated all the time. And instead of failure to thrive, which is the typical symptom for celiac disease that doctors look for specifically, I was having problems with inflammation and bloating and putting on weight as opposed to not being able to put on weight.
Can you go back and just explain the failure to
So failure to thrive is a very slight person. They are, because of celiac disease, you can't maintain nutrients. So when a person has typical symptoms of celiac disease, which is mostly coined as failure to thrive, they are typically malnourished, and they have those typical symptoms where they can't put height, they don't have height, they don't have, they can't gain weight, they can't put on weight, they can't maintain the nutrients to thrive as a human being.
So a typical response would be to appear gaunt, very thin, malnourished.
Very malnourished, yeah, and to have those to look that way. But the problem is that now we're finding more and more people, and that's what my dissertation was on, is that the research needs to show that, and doctors and healthcare providers need to see that just because you're not having the typical symptoms for failure to thrive doesn't mean you're not failing to thrive. I was failing to thrive, but I looked completely different than someone that is gaunt and slight, and I was just so inflamed. I was squishy. That's the best way that I can describe inflammation, is that you get squishy. You're like a balloon.
Yeah,
You know
squishy,
what I'm talking about. That's the best way to describe it. And that's, so many people have that, and they don't know what's wrong with them, and their doctors say, I can't figure it out. And because we live in such a carbohydrate and gluten filled society where everybody eats all the breads all the time, you think it can't be that. It can't be that. It's got to be something else.
So can we backtrack, because I'm sure that there's loads of people that are watching that have no idea what celiac disease is. Can we start there?
So
What is
celiac
it?
disease is an intolerance to gluten and wheat. It is not an allergy. It is an intolerance. So there is an allergy where people can go into anaphylactic shock from wheat, and that's technically it's under the same umbrella, but it's not. This is an IgE response to gluten, which means that it's an autoimmune condition. So it's something in your genetics. It's something that you inherit, and it can only be triggered once you start eating gluten.
So there's obviously a genetic component and an environmental,
It's the perfect storm.
Okay.
The two come together, and you create celiac disease. Now, there is non-celiac disease gluten intolerance. That is a thing, but there's not enough research on it just yet for it to be medically coined and medically advanced, that people are looking into it. But a lot of people suffer with different kinds of sensitivities and intolerances to gluten.
Do you know, this is the first time I've thought about it, but is there a spectrum of the genetic predisposition to it, the insulin sensitive version, and then is there people that are down here we can churn gluten all day, we thrive on gluten?
I would say definitely, but because the gluten that we have now, like breads, are so heavily processed, so I would say, as a nutritionist, in my professional opinion, that most people don't thrive on gluten because it is so processed. Unless you're home making breads and you're grinding the wheat or the spelt or the grains yourself and using minimal processing and making a loaf of bread from scratch, buying a loaf of bread that's got a shelf life of 3 weeks without being put in the refrigerator.
There's something in there.
Yeah, there's more in there. So now you've got to think about not so much the gluten, because it still is gluten, but what kind of gluten is it? Now we're changing the form.
I heard
gluten.
that a lot of the gluten these days is genetically modified dwarf wheat, which is different from einkorn, which is the
original.
The original.
Yeah, this is what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
That's just, what is gluten?
Gluten is
it
a
carb?
protein.
Is it a protein?
It's a protein in wheat.
And why is it so bad? Spell it out for people.
Why is it so bad?
As in, because my understanding is the layman's understanding that gluten, and this is what I try to tell people, I don't know how accurate I am, you can set me straight on it. Gluten is a protein that's so tightly bound, it takes the body a lot longer and a lot more, puts a lot more stress on the system.
Yeah, and that can
is
be
that right
true.
Or wrong?
Yeah, that's definitely right. The problem is that every body is different, so every body reacts differently to different foods, and there are people that they won't have necessarily a reaction in the sense of they won't have a rash, they won't lose hair, they won't failure to thrive, they won't have inflammation, but something will happen with them if people will become more sensitive to gluten over time. That seems to be the response.
Yeah, and particularly when you were discussing that perfect storm. So I think the perfect storm is you add gluten, all of these preservatives, sugar that they put in bread these days, and whatever else is in there that obviously none of
all
it's...
the E numbers and the colorings
and
everything. I mean, if you look at a loaf of bread, you're not going to see ingredients list bread. You just won't. You won't see that. You're going to look at the ingredients list, and that's what I get all my clients to do, and I tell all my friends to do. Just start by turning a package over and looking at the ingredients, and try not to buy things that have an ingredients list. You go into the supermarket and go to buy a head of cauliflower. I guarantee you there's going to be not even an ingredient list on that.
Yeah, I understand.
There shouldn't be. It should just be cauliflower. So if you focus on whole foods, that's what our bodies are. That's what they really thrive on. So I don't know that anybody, to get back to your question, I don't know that anybody thrives on any kind of packaged food. But some people don't. There's definitely a genetic spectrum and a physical spectrum, whatever your background is. You know, a lot of people that come from Scandinavian backgrounds where there is a lot of bread, they tend to do better. I mean, I'm Scandinavian background and I don't do well on it, but generally speaking, they tend to do better because their culture, their genetics have been very bread oriented, very wheat oriented. People that are more like Aboriginal descent or Asian descent, they're much more rice oriented. So if you think about where your family comes from and where your genetic history is, that's kind of the best way for you to go to kind of start, to find a starting point and then work from there. So
Potatoes.
Asian, yeah, see?
Because you're Irish. You guys are making me feel bad. I had a cheese toastie just before I got here.
Oh, the guilt.
Right, well,
I know.
You can listen into the podcast again.
What was the ingredient list?
It was
Cheese.
bread and cheese.
And breast.
Bread and
Tomato. They're so good.
Well, see, there you go. And that's the thing, is that it's very addictive. You tell people that they have to give up bread and they get angry.
Yeah.
They get very upset.
Well, I think as well, a lot of people get angry and upset because you're making an already complicated world more complicated for them.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to understand everything they do in their life. They just want to be told, when I wake up in the morning, I just put the bread in the toaster and I eat it. That's my breakfast. Now,
That's
if you're
right.
telling me I can't have that, what can I have?
And if you have a sandwich for lunch,
Yeah, there's my lunch.
and you're going to have lasagna for dinner.
No, you're
now what?
you're derailing my whole day. Do you know?
And that's the thing, is that I try to tell people that they have to change their life. You have to change your life. When I first got diagnosed, so I got diagnosed with celiac disease in 2014, but I was already 80% gluten-free, and 20% of the time eating some gluten from 2010, I guess, is when I started that. So I had 4 years of being mostly gluten-free before I was diagnosed. And
you were still having symptoms of inflammation?
I was still having symptoms of inflammation just because I was still having some
small
gluten
traces
here
of
and
gluten,
there.
yeah.
You know, I wasn't
Gluten's
strict.
in everything. There's a lot of sauces.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like
Soy sauce.
a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
it's very difficult to go full gluten-free. Before we moved out to Dubai, I was reading a lot and came across the paleo world, and my housemate at the time had a Rob Wolf paleo solution book.
Yep.
And I started to read it on a Friday evening, and I read it the whole weekend. I thought, okay, I'll stop, see what all the fuss is about. And on the Monday morning, I woke up for work and I was wide awake. Like and I'm not a first thing in the morning person. So I was like, whoa, okay, so there's immediately some truth in this. Let me see how this goes. So powered through it for months and months and months, and my whole physique changed, and my work life wasn't too stressful at the time, but my physique changed, but by making that only change.
Yeah.
So then in a bid to help my parents, who were living off the sort of 1950s, 1960s, 1970s diet advice, the healthy living, low fat yogurt, low fat cheese, low fat dairy, low fat bread, all those things. I gave them both the book, and wasn't really, your family are the hardest people to help.
Definitely.
And that's, people need to footnote that and remember
Definitely.
that older family don't listen to the younger person in the family, because the younger person is the baby.
Yep.
Anyway, I was quite surprised. My dad took up the book, he read it, and he made the change. And he told me that he had just been for some blood tests with the doctor before. Mm-hmm. By the time the test results came back, he went to see the doctor again for the results, and he just started this diet. Mm-hmm. He told the doc, I actually feel a lot better. Like, the symptoms have gone. So the doc did another blood test, and the first results said that he had like this low level infection. He would get this real scratchy rash in his legs and in his cheeks. So the doctor re-tested his blood, and then another however many weeks later came back and he was way better.
Yeah.
So he continued on with this, and he's in his 60s, and he's now one of the people who is in the restaurant asking the waiter, what is this has gluten, what doesn't, like he's zero gluten, to the point now where his eyesight has improved. So he used to be one of these people where he would read at a full arm's length, and he started telling my mom, I can read this and it's closer. Got his eyes tested, and he like actually improved. They downgraded his lens, and then he did it again over about 3 years, and so he's had 2 downgrades on his lenses, purely based on, and they're not active. They're not like, walking the dog.
Marathon running.
No, not at all. They're kind of just normal retired couple, and his vision improved. Like I don't know what technically legally or whatever. So the optometrist downgraded his lenses. But I think going back to what you were saying, it's very hard to be full celiac, full gluten free. Like if you go into the malls and you're looking on the shelves, the smallest things contains gluten. The smallest, like sauces, like.
Yeah, I think they also use gluten as a binding agent.
Yes.
So you can find it in a lot of vitamins and a lot of minerals, like in supplements, and it's basically everywhere. It's like, I've read, you're probably the expert on this, that it's like paste.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why it can affect your digestive system so much, because it acts like a glue in your system, and it just hardens.
Yeah,
right?
it just doesn't digest easily. Whereas other foods, our digestive system, so your stomach, it has hydrochloric acid in it, and that's kind of what gets. We were talking about this with my friends the other night, and we were talking about one of the things that's really good for your digestive system is that, have you ever just looked at food and started salivating, like just looking at something really delicious,
Cheese
and just
toasties.
started feeling this, this like wet in your mouth, like, oh my God, that looks so good. Have you ever had that? And then your stomach starts grumbling. So that's the very beginning of digestion. So
Is that good or bad?
That's an amazing thing.
Okay.
That means that you've got excellent digestive juices. So one of the things, everybody takes supplements and whatnot. One of the best things you can do for your digestion is just to stop and look at your food for like 5 minutes before you start eating, because that gets things going. That gets things moving. And that's a really good trick for people with celiac disease, is to just spend some time and look at food and get excited about it.
I'm so happy that you said this. I do this all
You're
the time.
totally
Well,
normal.
you just stare at your food.
Yeah,
I don't stare at
just
my
for
food,
5
but I
minutes.
salivate over cheese toasties.
Over cheese toasties.
Yeah, that's not going to be helpful for people
Yeah.
with celiacs.
I know.
Yeah.
No, there is gluten-free bread, obviously. I mean, people do that. That's a really, if you're cutting out gluten, there's lots of different really good brands, rice bread, things like that. But there's a lot of binders, fillers, additives, preservatives, colorants.
I know one of the issues so obviously, like, you read a lot about this. I had a year and a half of doing nothing. But in the middle of that, I remember reading about some of the alternatives to gluten-free bread and the amount of tapioca starch that they put in it and how detrimental that was for your blood sugar levels. So a lot of the gluten-free alternatives were actually elevated your blood sugar levels a lot more than gluten itself.
Yeah,
Is that right?
it's hard to say, because the problem is that every body is different. So whenever magazines or journals put out articles like that, they're really just generalizing. So the basic thing with gluten is that if you're eating bread of any kind, whether it's got gluten in it or whether it doesn't have gluten, it's going to raise your blood sugar levels because it's a carb. Carbs will increase your glycemic index. If you are more susceptible to diabetes, if you have diabetes in your family and you have higher blood sugar levels to begin with, it's just going to increase them just because it's a carb. It's like eating fruit. The fiber will counteract some of the sugar, but if you're eating a carb-heavy diet, whether you're gluten or not, your blood sugar levels are going to increase. That's just it.
So why does gluten cause so much inflammation?
Just
Go as technical as you
because-
want.
As technical as I want. Why? Well, it can cause inflammation. There's still a lot of missing links for a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. But what they've come down to is that our bodies are just not built to digest the kind of gluten that is being created nowadays. So this never seemed to be a problem. But then, of course, they didn't have the medical advances that we have now to measure these things. So maybe it was a problem, but they just didn't know. But the type of gluten, the type of bread is not being grown in as rich soil as it once was. The nutrients aren't there for it. Bread really isn't nutrient dense, and we're putting nutrients. I mean, I'm sure you've seen these loaves of bread in the store.
Fortified.
Right.
Yeah.
We're adding more nutrients.
When you say nowadays, do you mean like the last 50 years? Do you mean like the
I would
last
say
hundreds of years?
The last 100.
I think as well the fortification started in the 70s.
Yes.
Yeah, where they started fortifying milk and
Yeah.
fortifying bread. Yeah, they do it a lot.
Putting in these additives because our earth is not what it once was. You know, the soil doesn't have the nutrients in it, you know, and also you're now transporting food. So now, you know, I mean, we're here in Dubai. How many things when you go into the supermarket are from Dubai?
Nothing.
So you are bringing everything from New Zealand, Australia, North America, you know, England, UK. You're bringing these things from all over the world. They have to be picked when they're not ripe. They have to be shipped. They have to wait and ripen up in the supermarket, and then you buy them. Whereas in a perfect world, you would grab something ripe off a tree, or you would grab, you know, wheat from where you are, where your body is, and you would make bread.
Yeah. Do you know, going off tangent a little bit, when I was younger, lived in Sydney, I started growing my own carrots. Well, I grew loads of vegetables. And when I grew my own carrots, I was looking at them and they looked so weird. Like some of them were all like squiggly, like they weren't
they're not
straight
pretty.
at all.
No.
And some of them had 2 little carrot heads and they were little, really little and very odd shapes. And it was really interesting to see what you see when you grow it yourself as opposed to what you buy in the store. And it's like there's
Absolutely.
a huge disparity here. What's happening? What is the missing link? And I know these days that a lot of carrots get grown in test tubes, like carrot shaped. They get grown hydroponically.
Yep.
They get fortified with just like water and like different nutrients, all for a particular color, shape, a look.
Because nobody wants to buy something in the supermarket. I mean, how many times have you done that? You see a bruise on an apple and you're like, I'm not going to choose this one. I'm going to pick another one, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we all do it. But now they're throwing away so many vegetables that aren't perfect.
Yeah.
And yet they are still perfect.
So just talking about the nutritionist that you met, when did that go down? When was that meeting? And what was the advice that sort of shifted you on this path?
The nutritionist that I met, this would have been in 2000 and I want to say 6 or 7. And then I went to school for nutrition in 2008. And she didn't tell me to get off gluten to begin with. We started off extremely basic. So we started off with, you know, the kind of thing that you talk to anybody with an eating disorder.
Yeah, your
You know,
relationship to food.
You just kind of say
Yeah.
you don't need to earn the right to eat. That was the baseline. And then we started looking more at inflammation and, you know, why I was so uncomfortable in my body, why no food seemed to work well with me. I was so agitated and aggravated with food and nothing seemed to digest well, nothing seemed to work well. And she had told me that, you know, I think this is probably the best route for you. So I would cut down on your carbs and just kind of focus on whole foods, that kind of thing. And I followed that. I followed that for such a long time. Like, as I said, in 2010, I went completely like hardcore gluten-free about 80% of the time. And then went back to, you know, you'd go out with friends, you know, have dinner out. You don't want to be, I mean, I was younger at that point. I was in my early 20s. You know, And you don't want to be that person when you go out. You feel bad about that.
I
right?
understand that, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've got no problem with doing that. Yeah.
Now that I'm in my 30s, I have absolutely no problem
Yeah,
being.
that's the same. Like I was just telling a few minutes ago about my dad. Now my dad is the guy in the restaurant who's like, which one of these has no gluten?
Yep.
And one of the last times I had dinner with him, he, forget it, I'm just going to have it. The very next day, he's like, I have scratchy, itchy legs right now. He's like, my body knows I had gluten last night.
And that's the thing, it's inflammation. And inflammation doesn't have to be squishy on your body. Inflammation can affect your eyesight.
Yeah, your pain.
You know, it can affect your pain. It can affect your hair growth. It can
Yeah.
affect your nail growth.
Yeah, nutrition is definitely, it's a huge thing. Like a few years ago, I went completely raw vegan for a while, and I remember the first time I had a slice of pizza, I couldn't move. I was so sick,
Yeah.
like so sick, and I was waking up at 5 a.m, doing 3 hours of yoga, like having so much energy and vitality and feeling amazing and being so clear-headed.
Yeah.
And that's obviously changed. Now I'm eating cheese toasties. But sorry, to go back to the whole celiac thing, can you explain to people what is the difference between just being gluten intolerant and being a celiac?
So celiac is an autoimmune response. So you have an autoimmune condition like rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, there are thousands of autoimmune conditions, but it is a genetic marker. It is something that is in your genetics. It is an autoimmune condition, and that's what it's categorized as. If you have non-celiac disease, gluten sensitivity, you do not have that genetic marker. You do not have an autoimmune condition. It just means that it's kind of like being lactose intolerant. Gluten just doesn't sit well with you.
So are the symptoms the same?
They can be.
Okay.
They can
So why
show
is
the
one
same.
like so, I won't say life-threatening, but kind of, yeah? And the other one...
Life deteriorating.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a better word.
Yeah, it's interesting because the thing is that when it gets bad, I cannot stress enough that everything has to be personalized. So every body is going to react differently, and no celiac disease looks the same on the same spectrum of people. And that's the thing with a lot of research, is that they try to find people that have the same symptoms for celiac disease and then put them in, as opposed to getting a wide range of people with different symptoms and seeing where the similarities are, as opposed to finding the similarities and then seeing what else they can pinpoint.
Out of curiosity, have they isolated the gene, the specific gene?
They have.
Okay,
They
what is
have.
that?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but they have done. They think that they've isolated it, but they're still in the research part of it. There's nothing that's been come of that, anything that's come of it, nothing that they can conclusively say, you know, this is where it is and this is how we can work around it. The best way to work around it right now is just staying away from gluten. That's your best work.
So for gluten intolerant people, what are some of the symptoms that they might experience?
Inflammation, again, but inflammation might come in a different way. They might find that they're scratchy. They might find that they're bloated. They might find that they
Irritable?
have digestive issues. Yep, irritability, lack of sleep, or lack of energy. So tired all the time, but you can't sleep. A lot of different things: insomnia, hypothyroidism, obesity.
Random pain.
All of these things are linked to both celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
And then for celiac disease, what are some of the symptoms that they might experience?
The same ones. So the same inflammation.
So that's hard to differentiate.
It's extremely difficult. And a lot of these symptoms, you have to remember, are like a lot of other symptoms from a lot of other autoimmune conditions or other conditions.
And also what some people just consider normal.
Right.
I'm getting old,
just
my knees are
tired.
supposed to be sore. Yeah, I've got kids, so I'm supposed to be tired.
Yeah, and they don't think twice about it. They
Yeah.
just think, suck it up and
Yeah.
move on. And you tell your doctor and they're like, well, you've got 3 kids at home, so,
It's
you
stress.
should be tired,
Yeah.
And they just shrug it off and go, okay, well, but the doctor doesn't say, what are you eating? How is your diet? Are you getting any exercise? Are you happy with your life? Or all of these big things that also contribute to your health. overall. And there's other conditions that are much easier to pinpoint those symptoms to, like my doctor did with hypothyroidism. My symptoms were so close to hypothyroidism that it was like, that's going to be a lot easier to give you a medication for, because there's no medication for gluten intolerance, right? So if I can prescribe a pill and take away those symptoms without actually fixing the problem, that's going to be a lot easier, which is what we have learned to do. We want to
Medicate.
add things, don't go to the root, don't go back to basics and fix the problem. Just take a pill that'll fix the symptoms. Because symptoms are what are getting you down, right? Symptoms are what are disturbing your day, but the problem will be there whether you take a pill or not, right? But if you get rid of the symptoms, then it makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah.
But it also makes the problem a lot worse because you're not actually dealing
long
with it.
term. And then I find that a lot of these things I spoke to you about this before, not on the podcast, but about how they can cascade into other things. Like I think my mum had a gluten intolerance.
Right.
And that developed into and obviously probably a predisposition that developed into an autoimmune disease that
Right.
developed into like a
More and
huge,
more problems.
that was degenerative, progressive, and it got so bad.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the medication just makes it worse and worse and worse. It prolongs the severity of the symptoms, but makes everything worse in the long term, I think.
Yeah.
That's just an observation.
Well, yeah,
I don't know how right it is, but this is an observation of seeing, someone that I love very dearly go through this whole medical machinery of being put in that system and not understanding nutrition.
Yeah, I think like on that, one analogy would be that just being given medication to cover up the symptoms. It's just like when someone's trying to hide the smoke of a fire but not putting in the thing that's going to stop the petrol being poured on the fire. Right. So there's more over the years, like unfortunately like your mom experienced, you put more and more petrol on it and you're just taking more and more drugs to hide the smoke. And the fire is still burning. You're still tearing apart your health. So I think it's totally connected to these situations where the cascading effect just wipes people out.
And I think, and this is where I really think that nutrition is undervalued in the medical field. Now more with like holistic functional medicine, there's a lot of people and a lot of doctors that are looking to diet and to nutrition to be able to help people out of rheumatoid arthritis or lots of different non-communicable diseases, but still massively underestimated. And I think this is where nutrition plays a huge part.
Yeah, and doctors don't take a lot of nutrition in their medical degrees, and yet they will freely give nutritional advice. And I give my clients no medical advice. I tell them to talk everything over with their doctors, because that's not my place. But doctors don't seem to have a problem with giving out nutritional advice.
Yeah, and it's not very thorough. I remember in the UK I had some blood tests just to see, because actually it was at the start of this paleo journey. I was like, let me get some bloods and then I'll retest. And the nurse phoned me to say I needed to come in and talk about them, and I was like pretty good health. So I was like, what? She said, your cholesterol levels are high. And I was going, how are my cholesterol levels high? How, like I'm training every day. Turns out the HDL that should be high was quite low.
Right.
So it wasn't out of whack. I just didn't have enough of the head. So when she got in, she saw the paper. She's like, oh no, it's just the HDL is a bit low. She's like, so what you need to, I was like, okay, so what should I do? I know what I need to do. But I was like, okay, nurse, what should I do? And she said, you need to eat more of a Mediterranean diet. And I was like, okay.
But you live in Ireland.
Well, no, I was like, I was like, okay, what's that? And she's like, oh, you need to eat things more like avocados, olives.
Yeah, but advice like that is regional, right?
But either way, I was just like, hold on, nurse, you've given me two foods here.
Right.
Like, your advice is eat more of a Mediterranean diet. What is that? I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I walk out. It makes me feel like I should know more of a Mediterranean diet, and I walk out. I don't ask questions because should I know what that is? Yeah. I'm not going to question this nurse because I don't know. Maybe I'm the silly person. So out I go, going. The doctor told me to eat more Mediterranean diet. What is that? And then she said avocados and olives.
Right.
So she's given me two foods just to.
That you can't make a meal out of.
I can't do anything with.
Yeah.
I can't do anything
But
with
also
that.
understanding who you are as a person and where you live and the
Right.
climate that you live in
Yeah.
and the foods that are accessible to you. Like in Australia, you can find an avocado everywhere, but in Ireland, totally different story.
Well, I can like nowadays I can get it in the shop, but I was just like, and I don't blame the nurse because it's not her job. She should have gone. You've got this problem. My job highlights the problem.
Yeah.
Next door is our nutritionist.
Nutritionist.
Go speak to the person
Yeah.
next door.
Get
But I
some
think
advice.
I think like doctors get this bad rap, and yes, they don't do enough nutrition, and maybe they think they know, and some think they know, some don't know. But I think like the science is really only discovering these things slowly but surely. But 50 years ago, it acted like it knew it all, and it said, "This is what you need to do." Boom. And then they put so much money into that, the machine just moved too much. The machine grew
Definitely.
too big. And if they say, okay, it's actually not this, it's this, Big Pharma and Monsanto, right, let's point the finger at those bad guys. But also, there's so many farmers that are going to lose out. There's so many like people. The machine is way bigger than just the corporate stooges sitting in the boardroom in Manhattan.
Definitely.
Like there's so many more people. So I think now with the internet, people are starting to share anecdotal evidence. Oh, well, I did this and I did that. And now it's just, there's so much information out there
There's
on all
too
sides.
much
Yeah.
information.
And that can also be a problem
That's
too.
the problem,
because
is
it's
that
like, what do you do
Yeah.
when you have things like celiac disease?
You
where
Google it.
Yeah, you Google it,
And you go to different Medilink and Medi article, and you start reading these things, and they're just people's advice. It's not written from a doctor. It's not written from a nutritionist. It's just written from different people that have just said, this is what I classify this as, and this is what I would recommend.
Sometimes
So-
it is written by a doctor on a website.
Sometimes.
It's
Yeah.
written by doctor, whatever, and this is what they say. So I get clients in the rehab pain world come to this, from my research, Keith, this is what I've come up with.
Right.
And I'm like,
No.
there's other research that's actually been based on previous research to talk about what you're dealing with. Like your research, unfortunately, and I don't mean to undermine you, doesn't count.
No.
So
And I think that in that turn as well as finding your own research, like you're looking really at the top 5 Google results.
Yeah.
Right.
So it can be very, very skewed. I know I did my own research too after my accident. Man, if I listened to any of that, I'd still be in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like some of it is, yeah.
The intention is
Yeah.
right. The intention is good to try to figure some things out for yourself. But the biggest thing is to get in touch. Don't listen to what other people think about your body. Listen to your own body, and then go seek professional assistance.
So on that note, all of us talking about these particular topics, now that we have you here, you are a nutritionist, you have celiac disease, you understand what it's like. What advice do you have for people who are going through body issues, who are going through gluten intolerances or celiac disease? What would you recommend for them?
I would recommend that if they're going through it, that you can do this. It's a long road, and you really have to change your entire lifestyle. You have to change everything. You can't, so many people will say, what can I replace it with? Just don't think about replacing bread. Just take it out and build your life without bread and without any bread substitutes. And then slowly add it back in where you need to in a non-gluten form. But the biggest thing is to just go see a medical professional, get your blood work done, because that blood work specifically for gluten intolerance test will tell you if you are celiac. It won't tell you if you have non-celiac gluten intolerance. A blood test can't tell you that, but a blood test can tell you.
But there are
for
the, what are they called?
They're like scratch tested.
Yes.
So they do a scratch test on your arm, and whatever ones come up as, being inflamed, they'll...
And the food intolerance tests, are they quite
Yeah,
accurate?
That's a scratch test
Okay,
as well.
good.
Food intolerance test is a blood test as well. So you can do 2 different forms. Both, I would say, are relatively, as a base mark, they're great. But if you should know when you eat how you feel. A lot of people will know that, everybody, maybe you don't want to listen to the voice inside your head, because a lot of people don't like to because it interferes with your life. But you say, you know, I'm really full, but that dessert looks really good. Or
I do that all the time.
Right. And you eat it, even though you know that you're not hungry. You know that.
Yeah.
You feel it. You feel that you're full to here, but that looks so good and I'll start again tomorrow. We all do it. Everybody does it. So pay attention. Pay attention when you're eating your food. Pay attention to what you look at that makes you start salivating, whether it's a steak, whether it's a salad, whether it's, you know, dessert. And maybe if it's dessert, you know, you have a little bit of a sugar problem.
So what would a breakfast look like for someone who's cutting out gluten initially? So when they wake up in the morning, they don't put the toast in the toaster, they don't pack their sandwiches to go off to work.
I've got one. Sorry.
This is my biggest problem as a nutritionist, because I believe so heavily in personalized nutrition. I can tell you what my breakfast looks like, but it's certainly not going to look the same for anybody else, because what I would recommend for one person, they could have yogurt and gluten-free granola, but maybe they have a nut problem and another person can't have it, or maybe they have a dairy problem and they can't have it. So I'll give them coconut yogurt. And
Yeah, I love coconut yogurt, but the tapioca starch.
Exactly. So they've got a problem with that. You know, they're trying to cut down sugars and eat more low carb as opposed to just gluten-free. I have bulletproof coffee every morning. That is my morning routine.
What?
Talk about that for a second.
Bulletproof coffee.
No.
So my coffee, my friends will attest to this, that my coffee is a wonderful concoction
Dave
of just
Asprey's
about
stuff?
everything. Sorry?
Is it you have the actual bulletproof coffee, Dave Asprey's one?
Well, that started off, so I started off with his, so just butter coffee, but now I don't do dairy very often. So now I put coconut butter in my coffee. So coconut butter or coconut mana, I put that in my coffee.
Can we backtrack? What is this?
So bulletproof coffee is something that Dave Asprey started, and it comes from the Tibetan butter tea. So black tea with butter in it, and they would put some sweetener in it sometimes, and because it's a high fat coffee, so it's fat fueled coffee in the morning. Now, if you don't like coffee or you can't handle caffeine, I can only handle caffeine in the morning. I'm very sensitive to caffeine. Caroline will attest to this because she offers me coffee every day at the studio. And I say, if you give me coffee in the afternoon, I will not sleep tonight. I'm such a grandma. I cannot have coffee past 1 o'clock.
I have that problem too, but my cutoff is 4.
Okay. See, everybody has a different cutoff. Mine is 1. I can't do it caffeinated. I can only have decaf. So
I can have coffee before I go to sleep.
I know.
full strength.
I can have a coffee
High test.
nightcap.
Yeah, he could have 11 p.m. macchiato.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Just go to bed, close my
Mochaccino.
eyes.
Mochaccino.
I
My
will
alarm's going
lay
off.
there
Another
in
coffee.
bed with my eyes wide open, so restless. And it took me about a week to figure out when that sort of flipped for me.
Okay, so this is a high-fat coffee. I think I've read about this stuff because I tried to do keto as a vegetarian, which is so hard,
So
for a week. And they put coconut, a big thing of coconut oil in black coffee.
Yeah, that's
So-
not nice. So I would never do that.
Yeah,
It tastes
there's-
disgusting to me.
Dave Asprey and Bulletproof Coffee is it's his brand. It came out about. I was in the UK when we were playing around with it, so 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah, maybe more.
Yeah,
I mean,
but that's
try
his brand.
this.
But he uses butter. He
Yeah,
uses
he
grass-fed butter.
Grass-fed butter.
To get the same.
Which is
fat
what I
levels.
used to use. And I still use grass-fed butter if I can't get my
But for
hands
some
on
people,
anything
sorry
else.
to that makes people quite mucusy, so they don't.
For
they don't
my
deal well
mom,
with it.
it gave her heart palpitations.
Coconut oil.
So coconut oils, I use MCT oil.
Yeah, it's
so
the same. It's the mid-chain
what I
triglycerides
put
that you're
in my
looking for.
coffee is
It's the fat.
coconut
Yeah.
butter. I put MCT oil. I put grass-fed collagen, which is protein from bovine. You can get marine collagen, but I prefer the grass-fed collagen. I put a little bit of Swerve, which is like erythritol, just to make it a little bit sweeter. Or I'll put in stevia because I don't eat any sugar. And I'll put in some coconut cream or almond milk, and I throw it in a blender. And
You got a
and
milkshake.
sometimes I'll put in some ketones. So from a company called Perfect Keto, I'll put in some exogenous ketones if I just want to get a little bit more focused.
What's the
on my day.
grass-fed collagen?
So the companies that I would recommend is Bulletproof by Dave Asprey. He's got grass-fed, beautiful, wonderful collagen. Perfect Keto has collagen that's grass-fed. Great Lakes collagen. What would be some other ones? Spruce collagen. I don't know that you can get any of these ones here. I had a really hard time when I lived in Dubai getting grass-fed collagen.
Yeah, it's
I
not
would
easy.
have to order it off of
You've
Desert
got to get it
Cart
online.
every time.
I order everything offline
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Like huge.
A friend of mine was looking into. He's heavy into this world of really extra healthy nutrition, and he was looking into setting up a business to import this stuff, and even that was heavily lots of bureaucratic hoops to jump through.
Well, like I did after my accident, I did the Gerson therapy, and like I even got you onto the niacin, like huge amounts of like different interesting supplements and stuff like that. But yeah, you'd have to import everything. You can't get anything here. It's a challenge.
And
for
the
sure.
point is that grass-fed is best. Like if you're going to go for meat or protein,
you can
or
get
anything,
The
Kerry
marine-
Gold butter
yeah,
in the stores here, which is
and cheese. The Kerry
which
Gold
is one of the
cheese.
best things to come out of Ireland.
Yep, definitely.
Is Kerry
Is that
Gold
the
butter.
green
I
one? I
recommend.
think I ate that.
It's the
sometimes.
gold.
It
It's
should
the
be
gold
gold.
like cube rectangle with the film over it.
That's the
Okay.
salted one. I think the unsalted one is silver.
Possibly.
Yeah. So I put the unsalted butter if I'm going to put butter in my coffee, and it makes it really creamy.
It thickens it up.
And it's
Gets it
black.
real
It's not
creamy.
milk coffee.
No, because you've got butter in it now. So
Okay.
now it's a bit more milky and creamy. So it's thick and frothy, and it's like a latte.
Yeah,
But
nice.
it's filled with proteins and good
It will
fats.
for breakfast. That will fill you. So that's
Yeah.
forget your
That's
toast.
I feel like you're both talking to me about this, about changing my cheese toasty
you had
habit.
cheese toasties this morning.
No, to be honest with you, Chelsea, you're really inspiring me to. I feel like after my accident, I was so vigilant, and now I've turned into a bit of like I'm alive, it's fine, now I can
But
be
I
a
feel
slub.
like everybody does that
Yeah,
with
yeah.
life. And the thing is to find something that works for you and makes you feel good. So you're going to go to an extreme. Like when I first got diagnosed with celiac, I went so extreme and I didn't go to any restaurants. I didn't have an outdoor life that involved going out because I was so afraid of being glutened. I mean, there's so many
Being
things that you
glutened.
can get. That's what celiacs say. You don't want to be glutened because that makes you
Then you're a
feel so
mess.
terrible.
I think
But you have to find the happy medium. And now I carry charcoal everywhere I go. That is one of the best things you can do for celiac disease is carry charcoal with you.
I have so
Why?
much charcoal. Please explain why.
Because it absorbs.
Activated charcoal.
Yes, it absorbs. It absorbs toxins.
So
if
I
you
can
have
do that
You
to
eat
counteract the
charcoal.
cheese toasty.
Yeah, so it comes in little capsules. They are great at absorbing toxins, but they're also great at just absorbing. So if you've ever spilt something and put charcoal on it, and you'll see that it just
Really?
soaks it right up. Yep.
I've seen charcoal toothpaste.
Yep.
That's like a thing now.
Yeah.
Is that what these pictures online I'm seeing of people brushing their teeth
With black
with,
stuff,
with
yeah.
dirt?
Do you remember my water? The black water.
Yes.
So that's
The expensive water.
Yeah.
Yes. Charcoal water. These are trends. I mean, I don't know that it's got enough in it to do anything. Kind of like chlorophyll water. People will do that.
Yeah, I
That's
do that
also
too.
a good one.
I do
Yeah.
swamp water.
Well,
Yeah.
this is the type of thing. Look, right, there are two extreme things that you've just said: swamp water, charcoal water. Going back to what you said about when you first went celiac, you stayed away from the different places, and when you went after your accident, when you're trying to change your life, you have to make these extreme interventions.
See where your limits are.
Like you have to smash your life. You can't just like make one little change and expect that to be enough. You need.
I think in both cases, sorry to interrupt you, I think in both cases, it's like you have to do something because your health is at such a place that if you don't, then
Make a big change.
make a huge change. So you're right, you need to go to the extremes to like
a full withdrawal from gluten, from dairy, from this.
Yeah.
That has to happen not because it's a punishment for the way you have been living,
no.
but because we need to give your body a full reset. And we need to
Mm-hmm.
cut out all of the foods that are potentially causing you problems. Not just to see how you are in the few days after you do it, because that's going to be terrible. Those few days, you're going to have
Oh, yeah.
withdrawal symptoms. You're going to have crashes. You're
Gonna
going to have
have a
mood
hangover.
swings. Yeah. But then when you come out
Really
of that,
bad
this is where I think vegans get a bad rap. Is they make the changes that they make from their diet. Boom, I've seen this documentary. I've listened to this person. I'm going to go vegan. I think it's correct for all these reasons. Whatever they are is not relevant to what I'm about to say. But when they do make the change,
they become preachy vegans.
well, no. Well, firstly they feel, but they don't just go out to preach because people know that's annoying. But they suddenly feel so good, like internally. They feel better, they sleep better, they act better, they make better decisions, they're happier. They, from a good place, they want to share that on people. So then they say, I'm vegan, I'm this, I'm that, you should be vegan. And then it becomes this battle that people get the preachy thing. But what they've really inflicted on their system is they've reduced all the poor foods. Like we've said before, the dairy thing that you were saying.
Yeah, so this is my 20-year experiment with my diet. Is that so? Obviously, I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian for a long time, but I don't feel that meat is the problem whatsoever. I feel like it's the processed food. So for me, when I went from a veggie, because you can easily be a junk food vegetarian, and I've gone through stages where I'm massively a junk food vegetarian. But there's also, when I cut out the dairy, the biggest change that I saw is that I couldn't have cookies and ice cream, and like I couldn't have any chocolate, any processed food, even rice crackers, or everything that you walk through the aisles, the 15 aisles of just crap. Those 15 aisles are all out, and all you can do is vegetables and like an actual real food. And I think that's the biggest difference. That's the massive change. So it's not so much like, if I was going to recommend a eating style to someone, I would say to eat a whole food diet that included grass-fed organic meat, but no processed food.
Because you can achieve that, what you said. You can walk down all those aisles and just do the meat aisle.
Yeah,
that's the paleo world. That's
walk the perimeter of the supermarket.
Yeah, that's Rob Wolf's advice. Is simple. You go into the store. You start the moment you step into the store, and you just pick the meat aisle, the fruit aisle, the vegetable aisle, and then.
But in saying that, sorry to backtrack, I really do think that people now need to become conscious of where all this meat comes from, this farmed fish industry, like all of the meat. I think as a society, we really need to start looking at that, and not as a battle, like I'm battling you because I'm a veggie and you're not, but guys, like this isn't working at all. We need to figure out a new solution to do this humanely, so that we don't, like, this is my idea, or maybe my sentiment behind this. There has to be another way, because that's not right. What's happening at the moment, it's just not right.
No, and so many vegetarians and vegans think that I'm assuming you're a meat eater.
Big time.
Perfect. So that us meat eaters, that we dislike animals, and that's why we eat animals. And I don't know about you, I love animals. I am such an animal lover. I love cows. My dad's side of the family has a lot of dairy cattle, and they have meat cattle as well. And I would bottle feed the cows. Like, I love them. They're all free range, pastured, they roam, and that to me is humane.
Yeah, I agree.
That is a humane life for that cow. It's being taken care of nicely. It's not being factory farmed. It gets the freedom to move around. Same with chickens.
And then you, at the same time, in turn, get the nutrients that you need.
Yeah. And the happiness. I feel like happy animals make for happy people.
You eat meat that is actually moved.
Yes.
Like the muscles that have moved.
No hormones, no antibiotics, no genetic modification, nothing like that.
Yeah.
And most of all, not being force-fed to bulk up for a shorter amount of time.
Eating grains.
And
corn.
Because that's going to affect me.
Yeah, because that's going to raise their inflammation levels. Anyway, we've digressed so much. We've gone from celiacs to now meat conversation.
But the thing is that it all comes back together. Celiac even affects the kind of meat. So people think I'm celiac, I need to cut grains out, but they're not actually looking at the quality of the meat that they're eating.
Yeah,
if they're a meat eater.
Even in beef patties, there's gluten.
Right. Even the cow being fed wheat. I mean, when was the last time you saw a cow in a wheat field?
Never.
Right, because they don't eat wheat, they eat grass. But our cows are being fed wheat, and that affects me.
I know. Will that affect things?
Yeah.
Down the will it?
Of course it will.
Wow. How?
Of course it will.
The consistency of their own flesh.
It changes their bodies. It changes their their makeup, it changes the quality
Their
of
inflammation
meat.
levels too.
Right.
Yeah.
And now I'm eating something that's already inflamed when I'm already inflamed. The connection, nothing is isolated. We are all connected. Everything is
Yeah,
connected.
you know the saying, you are what you eat eats.
You are what you eat eats.
So what you
Yeah.
eat,
I'm a cheese
you
toasty.
are the thing that yeah. Well, you're the grain that the cow who made the cheese
Yeah.
eats, and you're the pesticides that your
Vegetables are being
vegetables and your bread, the whatever the grain that made the bread that made the toast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
It all comes back together.
what let's go top 3 symptoms to look out for, and then top 3 changes that you can make.
Top 3 symptoms, I would say, are really easy to find, but the top 3 atypical symptoms that you might not think would be connected to celiac disease would be inflammation of any kind of inflammation, joint stiffness, pain, lethargy. So not being able to get up in the morning, not getting enough. You're getting plenty of sleep. You're almost to the point of oversleeping. And you can't get out of bed. That's a really good symptom. And also anxiety. Anxiety plays a huge role for so many people now. Like everywhere you go, every person has anxiety all the time. Like it's debilitating, it's crippling. And that's actually something that has been pinpointed to celiac disease and to other kinds of autoimmune conditions. Anxiety is a form of inflammation. And that's a really good symptom to look out for, that maybe you might have connected to I'm just stressed out, or I just have anxiety I don't know why.
You just reminded me of Dr. Perlmutter's book on Alzheimer's potentially being a form of type 3 diabetes.
Oh yeah, Grain Brain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Grain
that's
Brain.
a great book.
Yeah, excellent. All of these things, all of these books.
And Wheat Belly.
Wheat Belly,
Yeah.
yep.
So
Incredible.
where's the science world on that? When did he write that book? That book's at least 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, that came out a while ago.
So he would have written that on research that was done even earlier than that. But
Mhm.
the premise behind that is that they think that gluten intolerance and gluten sensitivity is now leading to a longer term source of inflammation that is playing or creating problems for people's mental health in their older
Yeah.
age.
So there's been more research done with that, but they've also attributed it to sugar as well, because as I was saying to Caroline, gluten and sugar kind of come as a package deal. If you buy bread, there's going to be sugar in it. That's just how the cookie crumbles, as they say. They're not exactly sure if it's both, if it's one or the other, but sugar has been shown now to kind of be up there with gluten to have really severe effects on your brain.
That's a very good book. I'd recommend anybody who's
Absolutely.
got
Yeah, I agree.
Alzheimer's or mental health in their family to look up that book, because
And even if you don't, it's just got really good
Yeah.
information, just general information to just
Grain
take
Brain
with
by
you.
Dr. David Perlmutter.
Yeah.
Okay, so then 3
lifestyle hacks that I can think of. Just go to the extreme, cut everything out, and then take
Work
charcoal.
back from that?
Work a little bit back. Now, you're never going to be able to bring gluten back in. That's just not what's going to happen if you've got celiac disease. You just got to resign yourself to a life of no gluten. But, cut everything out really strictly and then bring it back to 80% of the time. You're going to be strict with no carbs, no gluten substitutes. And then 20% of the time you're going to have your tapioca starch, you're going to have your rice flour and your spelt. And actually spelt is not gluten-free. That's wrong. Don't listen to that. A lot of people think it is.
Can I ask you something off topic? Is amaranth gluten-free?
Yes, I believe it is, but it has to be in a specific form for it to be gluten-free. So it usually doesn't come on its own. It's usually with other things, but in isolation, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I've got another question. You mentioned briefly about the charcoal. Do you have other tips that celiac people can do to mitigate the severity of symptoms after they've eaten gluten? So we've
I
got
would say
charcoal.
charcoal and digestive enzymes. So the digestive enzyme that I recommend is bromelain, which is found in pineapple. Now people would normally just say, can't I just eat pineapple? But there's not enough in a slice of pineapple. You'd have to eat a lot of
There's a
pineapple
lot of
to
sugar in
get
pineapples.
yeah, and so you'd have to eat a lot of pineapple to get the quantity of bromelain. But a lot of digestive enzymes are addictive to the stomach, kind of like how laxatives are to the bowel. So if you buy hydrochloric acid as a digestive enzyme, which is what our stomach naturally produces, your stomach will get the feeling that I don't need to do this anymore. Something else is doing this for me. So I really don't recommend hydrochloric acid as a digestive enzyme, even though that's what we have already. Bromelain is a really safe and effective digestive enzyme, and I take both of them, bromelain and charcoal, if I ever get glutened or ever go to a restaurant where, everything on the menu says we make everything in the same pot as everything else. And I don't do it very often, but if I do want to go out with my friends and have a nice time and just relax, I will take those things.
You're gluten prepared.
Exactly. So that I'm not feeling, terrible the next day. Those are my two secrets for sure. Without those, I wouldn't be able to come to Dubai and go out with my friends and, do the things that I want to do that make everyday life so much easier,
Cool. So then where can people find you online? Actually, also, what's the name of your research paper that you've got published?
It's the full name. It's found in the Journal of Toxicology, and it's, if I can get this correct, I wrote it 2 years ago, so bear with me, but I think it's called Failure to Thrive, a relationship between the correlation for celiac disease and obesity.
Okay, perfect. And then where can people find you online, website or social media?
Yeah, so my company is called Marikai Personalized Holistic Nutrition, and they can find me at marikaiholisticnutrition.com, I believe.
Cool.
Amazing, Chelsea. We're so happy to have you
Thank
here.
you so much
Thanks
for
for coming to
having
speak to
me.
us.
Yeah,
Wonderful
all the
to
way
meet
from
you.
Canada, so we're happy to steal some time with you. Thank you for
Yes.
being with us, and thanks so much,
See you next
guys.
time.
Thank you.
Bye.